Well friends, we are now on to shutter speed. So last week we shot in aperture priority and we talked all about aperture and what it does and what it means. And so this week I have you turn your little dial to the shutter priority mode, which means on the Canon it's going to say TV and on a Nikon it's going to have an S. What that's going to do is that's going to allow you to choose the shutter speed. So you'll be able to choose the ISO, the white balance, and the shutter speed, and then your camera is going to control what the aperture should be, okay? But don't worry, I'm gonna explain all about what shutter speed is today. Shutter speed is that third part. Remember I talked about that exposure triangle where you have three main parts of your exposure. You have, for your camera, you have the ISO, you have aperture, and you have shutter speed. And anytime you change one, it's going to adjust the others. Before we get started shooting, the very first thing that I do every time, I have to have a clean lens. So, and don't forget, so this is the lens pen lens cleaning system. It is the best because the little brushes, and I know for those of you who've watched, you're like, we know this already, but I promise you, you need to clean your lenses. And it has that little carbon pad that's gonna make this squeaky clean and have your images looking gorgeous. So Lens Pen has actually given a DSLR cleaning kit which has 3 lens pens in it, and this kit is amazing. I'm giving one away each week to one lucky person. That person will also receive my Good Golly Photography Quick Tips and Tricks little book, accordion book, on everything that I've covered, and then the 10 things to do before you shoot, little reminder, this, and we have a new gift which I'm really excited about. We have a new item in our giveaway, which is MPix, which is the sister lab to the professional lab that I use. They're who I recommend everyone go to, and again, I'll link them below. But they are giving away a $25 print credit for their website. So this whole package deal is going to one lucky person, and for those of you who have already won this, I'll get in touch with you because you get an MPix $25 gift card as well. So I'll get in touch and get you that information. But this is an awesome little giveaway. And all you have to do in order to be in the running for this is comment below, get you one entry. Comment on any of my photography videos and that's an entry. If you let me know that you've subscribed on my Instagram page, so go to Instagram and let me know that you've subscribed to my YouTube channel, that's another entry. You have lots of chances. So each video, each of my photography videos, if you comment on each one is an individual entry. So you have a lot of chances to win this awesome gift. Okay, so now all about shutter speed. Shutter speed controls the amount of time that your shutter stays open. That means that little opening in your lens, how much time it's allowing that light to pour into the camera, okay? So the faster the shutter speed, the less time there is for light to get in, but it also freezes things. The longer the shutter speed, the longer it's left open, the more there's room for blur. Sometimes that blur is great and sometimes it's intentional. For example, if you're photographing water and you're photographing a fountain, well, if you have a really fast shutter speed, it's gonna almost freeze each little individual droplet. But if you really want that beautiful hazy look, that's from a slower shutter speed. Same thing with if you're photographing cars at night. A lot of times people will play with light. Well, if you leave that shutter open, it's gonna allow you to almost draw with light. You'll see sometimes people do that with sparklers, and that's with a slower shutter speed. Shutter speed is measured in seconds. So the larger the denominator, the faster the shutter speed. Now, one tip that I have for you, this is kind of a rule of thumb that I go by. I don't ever shoot slower than the length of my lens. That means this is a 200 millimeter lens. I rarely shoot slower than 1/200th of a second. Because what that means is kind of the longer it is, the weightier it is, a lot of times it leaves some room for shake. So this is just kind of my rule of thumb. If I'm shooting a 50mm lens, I tend to not shoot below 1/50th unless I have a tripod or I'm photographing something that's not moving. I'm fairly stable, but you know, things can move and it doesn't take much to blur an image, and you really don't want to ruin an image because your shutter speed. With this, what I'm gonna have you guys do this week is I want you to play around with your shutter speed. I want you to photograph some things that are moving. I want you to photograph kids or people or dogs running around. I want you to photograph water. I would like you to photograph light, play around with light and those longer shutter speeds. Because remember, we're gonna be controlling the shutter speed this week. So I want you to slow that shutter speed down to be able to really blur those images and do that intentionally. Now, if you're going to blur those down, I do recommend either placing your camera on a surface, a flat surface, make sure it's nice and stable before you walk off and have your camera fall, or on a tripod. And that way, you know that your camera is steady so that the only movement that's gonna be in that image is gonna be from the light or from the subject itself. Now that it's getting warmer, you can play around with some pinwheels. That's a really fun one to do. Blow on that pinwheel, take a picture, and take a picture at different shutter speeds, and you'll see it slowly start to, as the faster the shutter speed gets, all of a sudden it looks like your pinwheel is standing still. Now, I think I said on my last video that I used a little scrolly wheel on the top for my aperture setting. That's not right. On my camera, I have mine set up to where the wheel on the back controls my aperture and the wheel on the front controls my shutter speed. So for me, all I have to do is move this little dial right here and it's gonna change my shutter speed. Now, again, you can change that in your settings. A lot of times your camera will allow you to choose which little scrolly wheel is gonna control either your aperture or your shutter or even your ISO. So, but for me, I changed this little scrolly wheel and that's gonna adjust my shutter speed. If you aren't sure, you can always look in your manual. If you've lost your manual, like majority of the people in the world, the beautiful thing is the internet has all the answers and you can easily do a Google search. How do I change the shutter speed on my whatever camera that I have? And it'll tell you exactly how to do that. So when you go to shoot, I want you to first look around. What is the lighting situation like? Are you shooting inside? Are you shooting outside? How bright is it? That's gonna help us determine what our ISO is. So we're going to set our ISO. Then we're gonna look at the quality of the lighting, the temperature of the lighting, I should say. We're gonna decide what is the temperature of the lighting. Is it a sunny day? Is it fluorescent bulbs? Is it shade or cloudy? And we're gonna adjust our white balance. And then the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna think about what we're photographing. Do we want there to be blur? Do we want it to be crisp and sharp? Well, if we do, then we wanna make sure that our shutter speed is faster. So some examples of shutter speeds. As a rule of thumb, I tend to shoot over 1/250th of a second. That ensures that I get a nice sharp picture. Also, keep in mind, I photograph a lot of children. So children move a lot. They wiggle. They are constantly going, which means I'm constantly going, which means I don't always get to stop and be really, really still when I'm shooting. I try to. I also tend to hold my breath when I shoot, which is not a great habit. I tend to shoot over 1/250th. And remember, it's a fraction of a second, okay? So it's 1/250 is what I'm saying. The faster your shutter speed, the sharper your image. The slower your shutter speed, the more blur can take place, okay? And sometimes that blur is great and sometimes it's intentional, but I want you to learn how to control it, and I don't want this to just be a gamble. I want you to understand the settings that you are using and why you're using them, and it's gonna help make you a better photographer. So guys, thank you so much for joining me. If you have not yet subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Also hit that bell icon so you can be notified when I upload a video. And I hope you all have a wonderful crafternoon.